Alrighty folks, to kick off the divisional draft breakdown series, we're going to be looking at the AFC North Division. The AFC North consists of the Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns, and Cincinnati Bengals, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. In 2021, the AFC North Division will be facing off against the NFC North and the AFC West. The divisional matchups this year for the AFC North will be decent for the 2021 fantasy season. The main reason is that they're facing off against the AFC West, which contains fantasy offensive powerhouses. The AFC West has the Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Chargers, Las Vegas Raiders, and the Denver Broncos. The Chiefs and the Chargers seem like lock and loaded weekly fantasy producers. The Raiders certainly have weapons to make any game into a shootout and finished last season ranked 10th in offensive scoring output. The Broncos have a ton of skill position talent at every position, except for the most important, which is quarterback. Although, depending on a level up from Drew Lock, which is unlikely, or Teddy Bridgewater sustaining more drives, or a trade for the rumored Aaron Rodgers, this Denver squad could easily find itself among the top offenses in the league this year. These high-powered offenses are wonderful for fantasy production on both sides of the ball, as it forces the opposition into more scoring-efficient plays, aka passing plays, in order to keep up. The NFC North does contain some quality offenses and some fairly poor defenses. They have the Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, Chicago Bears, and Detroit Lions. This division as a whole should be at worst a neutral situation for fantasy production this year. The biggest problem for the AFC North is the division itself, though. 3 of the 4 teams want to play smash-mouth football, which means they want to run the football and play great defense. Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh all have the same run the ball and play good defense mantra. All 3 may try to play football that way in 2021. The only team that will be our friends for fantasy purposes on a weekly basis are the Cincinnati Bengals with their horrendous defense and top third offense. These guys should get into quite a few shootouts with that defense and an offense that's good enough to move the ball against most teams on a weekly basis. Bear all that in mind when making some of your redraft decisions this upcoming draft season. AFC North should be decent for fantasy purposes in 2021, but likely not the best due to playing a bunch of games against their own division, which will be bad for fantasy purposes outside of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now let us dive into the individual teams and who they drafted this year and the impact these players may or may not have to your respective dynasty stars, stashes, and piece of trashes. Let's first look at the Baltimore Ravens. They drafted 8 players in total in the 2021 draft, including 2 first-round picks and 2 third-round picks. Let's go over each pick individually and talk about any impact these players may have this year. With their first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Baltimore Ravens selected Rashad Bateman, wide receiver out of Minnesota, with the 27th pick overall. Rashad Bateman was an outstanding receiving prospect coming out of college. He saw good production as a freshman in 2018 and had a monstrous 2019 season with 1,219 yards and 11 touchdowns. He weighed in at his pro day at 6 foot even and 190 pounds. The Ravens were in dire need of an alpha receiver going into this offseason. They didn't land one in free agency as all the big names were either franchise tagged or didn't want to sign in Baltimore due to the nature of the run-first, low-volume pass offense that they run there. They did bring in Sammy Watkins, but he's more of a complementary piece at this stage of his career. So, to fill that alpha receiver need in their offense, the Ravens selected Rashad Bateman. While a fit in terms of real football needs, and Bateman's skill set was a perfect match, in terms of fantasy football, it was a letdown for Bateman. Bateman will almost certainly command quite a chunk of the target pie there in Baltimore. His presence will help the offense move the ball on a more consistent basis and take some pressure off of Watkins, Hollywood Brown, and Mark Andrews. However, the target share for most of these players will likely see a decline. Andrews relies on touchdowns more than volume to be a fantasy asset on your teams, and Bateman should be an excellent red zone threat as well. I would expect Andrews' efficiency to decline in the 2021 season as he has been competing for red zone targets his entire career with the likes of Hayden Hurst, Willie Snead, and Hollywood Brown. Not exactly guys that leave you shaking in your boots down there. Bateman should be able to get open routinely down in the red zone, which leaves the relatively unathletic Andrews to try to command targets while being the number 2 or number 3 option a lot of times. Hollywood Brown may not see more targets in 21 compared to 2020, but what he lacks in ability to be a target hog, he makes up for in efficiency due to his tremendous speed. I think Brown will see more open field on deep throws in 2021 due to Bateman's presence and the run game potential. However, it's a toss-up on Lamar hitting him when the opportunity arises. I would expect more of the same stat lines for Hollywood Brown moving forward this season. With their second pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Ravens selected Odafe Oweh, an outside linebacker out of Penn State. They selected him with the 31st pick of the first round, and Oweh profiles as a super athletic defensive edge rusher with the upside to really disrupt on passing downs. This is an upgrade overall for the Ravens defense. The Ravens should be up in a lot of their games, and Oweh should only help produce more sacks and turnovers due to the increased pressure. This means their defense will be in play for your redraft leagues and that their offense should get a few more opportunities throughout the season. With their third pick, the Ravens selected Ben Cleveland out of Georgia, an offensive guard with the 31st pick of the third round. He's a 6'6", 343-pound mauler who profiles as a very good run blocker. His size limits his ability to redirect, but he has the size, frame, and strength to move NFL-caliber interior linemen. He likely will need to improve as a pass blocker in order to maintain starter status in the NFL, but with the Ravens' run-first schemes, he could certainly fill in quite well. They had yet another third-round pick and used it to select Brandon Stevens, a 6'1", 215-pound cornerback. He has a large frame for a quarterback and transitioned in college from a running back to a cornerback. So he has potential to develop into a solid option on defense, but will likely start his career out on special teams and as a depth piece on this defense. With their fifth pick, the Ravens dipped back into the wide receiver pool and selected Tylan Wallace out of Oklahoma State with the 26th pick of the fourth round. Wallace is a very intriguing prospect. He blew up in a very big way as a 19-year-old sophomore to the tune of 86 receptions for 1,491 yards and 12 touchdowns. He did get injured late in 2019 as a junior after being on track for another stellar year. He decided to go back for one more year and played well, but not great in the COVID season last year. His advanced metrics are all well above average. However, his athletic profile is quite underwhelming and well below average, with the lone exception of a 49th percentile 40-yard dash at 4.55, which is about as average as you can get. I don't see Wallace doing much for fantasy squads or any fantasy squads while he's in Baltimore, especially with Andrews, Hollywood Brown, and fellow draftee Rashad Bateman there. You can probably leave him off your rosters, but if you have a spot available in a deep league, he is worth a stash for sure to see what happens. However, he should be one of your top cut candidates if need be. The final three picks made by Baltimore were cornerback Shaun Wade out of Ohio State, who we last saw in the national championship game killing his draft stock against Devonta Smith, Dalen Hayes, a defensive end out of Notre Dame, and Ben Mason, a fullback out of Michigan. These guys will likely not have much of an impact on your fantasy outlooks as they're mostly depth pieces at best. Next, let's look at the Cleveland Browns. They drafted 8 players in total in the 2021 draft, including 2 in the 4th and 2 in the 5th. Let's go over these picks and talk about any impact these players may have this year. The first draft pick from the Cleveland Browns in the 2021 draft was a cornerback out of Northwestern named Greg Newsome II. Newsome was actually the 4th cornerback drafted in the first round. He's a solid cover corner and has decent size at 6 foot and 195 pounds. He's also adept in the ball skills department. Cleveland already has a pretty good stable of cornerbacks there with Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams, and Troy Hill. However, Greg Newsome II should be good enough to compete for playing time on a regular basis from the get-go. Cleveland adds another piece to an increasingly scary defense there. To go along with the defensive theme, Cleveland drafted Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, an inside linebacker out of Notre Dame. He was projected to go in the mid to late first round throughout the draft process. However, a minor medical concern came up during a physical prior to the draft, and he fell to Cleveland at the 20th pick of the second round. Owusu-Koramoah is more of an open field, space, speed, and twitchy kind of player than a big thumper. His versatility and his skill set should allow him to play immediately in his first year, make some impact plays all over the field to play both in the run game and especially in the pass game with his coverage skills. Cleveland's defense should be in play for your redraft leagues in 2021. And because of these first 2 picks, as well as their free agent acquisitions this offseason, Nick Chubb is likely to see a really solid floor for the season. He doesn't catch a lot of passes, but he's extremely efficient on the ground and likely will have a lot of touchdown opportunities this year. Now, the last 2 picks for Cleveland that will have much of an effect on your 2021 dynasty outlook are Anthony Schwartz in the 3rd round with the 28th pick and Demetric Felton with their final pick, which was the 27th pick of the 6th round, number 211 overall. Both of these players were drafted as wide receivers, though Demetric Felton actually played running back throughout college. Anthony Schwartz was likely a top 10 fastest player in all of the NFL the moment he was drafted by the Cleveland Browns. He ran a 10.07 in high school at the state track and field meet in Florida. He did run a sub 4.30 at his pro day at 4.27. Outside of his speed, though, he doesn't offer much else in the passing game. He is someone to monitor, but I don't see him doing much in year 1. Demetric Felton is an interesting player to me. He played running back at UCLA and was used more as a pass-catching back than a between-the-tackles guy. He's 5'9" and 190 pounds. I don't forecast him to do much of anything in the NFL, but he is worth the late stash on your taxi squad. He was the primary man on kickoffs for UCLA last year. This fact, along with his versatile skill set in the passing and rushing game, means he will likely make the 52-man roster or practice squad at worst and play some on special teams. Should someone like Kareem Hunt go down with an injury for a few weeks, I think Felton could be asked to help out in the running back room until Hunt gets back. The rest of the Browns draft picks in 2021 will serve mainly as depth pieces at best. They likely won't have much of an impact on any players or positions in 2021. Now let's look at the Cincinnati Bengals. They drafted 10 players in total in the 2021 draft, including 3 in the 4th round. Let's go over some of these picks and talk about the impact these players may have within the Bengals roster for this season. First on the list is Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver out of LSU. The Bengals drafted Chase with the 5th overall pick in the 2021 draft, tying him with Corey Davis as the highest drafted wide receiver since Amari Cooper was drafted 4th overall in 2015. Chase is about as close to a lock at putting up a top 30 wide receiver number year in and year out. His floor is likely in that 30th wide receiver for the season. His ceiling is immense. The guy absolutely dominated in college the last time we saw him play in 2019 for the national champion LSU Tigers. That season saw him put up 84 receptions for a whopping 780 yards and 20 touchdowns while playing alongside fellow 1st and 2nd round wide receiver picks Justin Jefferson and Terrace Marshall. Chase projects as someone who will likely be in the top 15 wide receiver talks for the next 7 or 8 years in the NFL. And this will obviously affect a lot of the other players on this offense. Burrow clearly gets a huge upgrade to his outlook. T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd are probably the most difficult to project for the community, however. I believe we can feel relatively safe with all of the Bengals receiving options in 2021, though. Last year, Joe Burrow was averaging over 40 attempts per game, including the game in which he was injured and left early. Over a 17-game season, this comes out to 687 pass attempts, so clearly he's getting very close to 700. Assuming a similar 65.5% completion percentage in 2021, this leaves 450 completions or receptions to be doled out amongst the entire team. 450 is plenty to distribute. Considering the tight end group there is pretty weak, the next best competition for targets on that team is likely Joe Mixon. I would expect the targets to be hogged by the 3 main wide receivers in that offense as well as Joe Mixon. Drew Sample, CJ Uzomah, and the rest of the wide receivers and running backs there will have to fight for the remaining scraps in that offense. I expect Higgins and Chase to get the lion's share of the fantasy production, with Tyler Boyd serving up yet another solid but non-jaw-dropping fantasy year as the 3rd horse in that race. The next pick for the Bengals was an offensive tackle out of Clemson named Jackson Carman. He played as Trevor Lawrence's blindside protector in college. He's a Mauler-type blocker with top-end power and strength. However, he's more of a project than a plug-and-play starter coming into the league. He should have the necessary tools to move around from tackle to guard, however, and play a vital role should he prove to be better than I believe out of the gate, or if a starter goes down along the offensive line. The next 3 picks for the Bengals were all on the defensive side of the ball. They grabbed 2 defensive ends with their 305 and 406 picks. These picks were Joseph Ossai out of Texas and Cameron Sample out of Tulane. Ossai is an explosive player that can get off the ball quickly. This ability to burst off the edge should make Osai a disruptive force on the Bengals' defensive line in 2021. Sample isn't quite as polished or as explosive as Osai, but he is built bigger and showed out well at the Senior Bowl. I expect him to rotate and develop into someone who can play on occasion in 2021. The final of their 3 defensive picks was an interior defensive lineman named Tyler Shelvin out of LSU. He was quite dominant in that role for LSU within the SEC. He should be able to see playing time with the Bengals in 2021 despite them having solid players on the interior already. Considering the Bengals team makeup, I expect them to be getting run on quite a bit in 2021 as they're likely to be behind in most games, and Shevlin should certainly keep the interior line fresh while that's happening. The only player of potential consequence in fantasy for the 2021 season, besides their rookie kicker Evan McPherson that they took in the 5th round, is Chris Evans, a running back out of Michigan that they drafted with the 18th pick of the 6th round. Evans has elite burst and agility for a running back, but he ended up in the Michigan system in college, which has just killed tons of prospects coming out of high school since Jim Harbaugh showed up. That's really the only glimmer of hope for Chris Evans at this point. The other 3 draftees I didn't cover will likely be depth pieces at best for the Bengals in 2021. Deontay Smith out of East Carolina could potentially develop in the NFL as he did flash at the Senior Bowl. However, he wouldn't be affecting much of anything for 2021. And finally, we come to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh drafted 9 players in total in the 2021 draft. They do have one of the most fantasy relevant draft picks of the year, so let's go over a few of their picks and talk about the impact they may have. With the 24th pick of the 1st round, the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted Najee Harris, running back out of Alabama. This will affect Pittsburgh's offense quite immensely in 2021. Last year, they had the corpse of James Conner, Benny Snell, and the rookie Anthony McFarland taking snaps at running back. Benny, Snell, and McFarland are still there, and they brought in Kalen Ballage as well. However, Najee Harris will get the bulk of the work in that backfield for 2021. The volume alone will allow Harris to garner a likely top 12 running back status in his rookie year. Najee Harris comes out of Alabama at 6'2" and 232 pounds, which puts him into that Eddie George category for size. He seems like he would be a big bruising back, and while he can certainly do that with his size, it's not really his game. The guy actually has tremendous feet and quite a bit of ability to be creative with the ball in his hands. He's also a very solid route runner and pass catcher out of the backfield. The guy should put up fantasy production out of the gate. Najee should help the Steelers move the ball on offense more efficiently than they did in 2020 when the run game was lacking quite a bit. Combined with their defense, this should lead to quite a few scoring opportunities for Pittsburgh in 2021, provided Big Ben is still serviceable at this stage of his career. With Pittsburgh's 2nd pick, the 23rd choice of the 2nd round, they selected Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State. Pat is yet another hyper-athletic specimen that comes out of Penn State. I expect him to play quite a bit of snaps in year 1 alongside Eric Ebron. However, I don't forecast a ton of actual fantasy production from him in year 1 as he learns the ropes. Tight ends are notoriously slow to pick up the game and dominate at the NFL level due to the requirements for offensive line schemes, blocking techniques, and of course what we're all interested in, route running and receiving skills. Freiermuth was an excellent blocker in college, so I expect him to help out a weak offensive line unit quite a bit in 2021. Pittsburgh does tend to play more traditional football, that's air quotes, traditional, which is great defense and run the ball down your throat. Pat should be able to help out in this fashion with his blocking skills. The only picks that the Steelers had the rest of the draft that will potentially affect how good the fantasy production is on this team in 2021 were their 3rd and 4th round picks. At 324, they selected Kendrick Green, a center out of Illinois, and at 423, they took Dan Moore Jr., an offensive tackle out of Texas A&M. These two should compete for starter reps or solid depth pieces along that line this year. Green can play anywhere along the interior and is more of a mauler type than a technician guy. And Dan Moore Jr. also has the versatility to move between guard and tackle. This versatility for both of them should allow one or both of them to see some time along the line in 2021, which, if they happen to turn into amazing players, would be a big boon to the entire offense there in Pittsburgh. The rest of the players you see there will likely not have much fantasy impact for redraft or dynasty leagues in 2021. And with the Steelers wrapped up, that will wrap up our AFC North portion of our divisional draft breakdown series. If you want to catch the rest of these divisional breakdowns as they come out, seriously consider hitting that subscribe button and then clicking the bell to get the notifications whenever a new video drops. You can catch Zilla Fantasy Elite over on Twitter at Zilla Fantasy, and you can catch my personal Twitter account at Todzilla1337. Thanks for watching the AFC North Divisional Breakdown. Hope to see you guys in the next video. Thanks.